Let's move to the pension, because I'm mindful of the time. The 30-odd million rands paid to Mr. Molefe, or not to Mr. Molefe, to Eskom Pension Fund. Can you just talk the committee through the meetings where the people in governance had discussions around this proposal? What were the details of these proposals?
Advocate, I think it's important that I just take you back to where we ended off in terms of how Mr. Molefe was appointed. So on the 2nd of October, we get a letter from Minister confirming Mr. Molefe's appointment from the 1st of October. The difficulty was that nowhere in that letter was there any term in terms of how long this role was going to be. It was, remember, where certainly the information that I had at hand is that every single CEO, and Eskom had 7 CEOs in that last 6 years. So the people doing the appointments, I would have thought, were industry thought leaders because they had so many through the revolving door. On the 1st, we get this letter to say that Mr. Molefe and Mr. Singh are now appointed. On the 8th of October, I receive an email from Ms. Daniels stating that it's an email between her and Ms. Rutman, the person who's responsible for governance in Department of Public Enterprises, where Ms. Rutman articulates the fact that it's a 5-year contract. Now, the difficulty that I'm faced with at this stage is that according to Eskom, and what Eskom has always done, it's always been full-time jobs, permanent jobs. So in this email between Ms. Daniels and Ms. Rutman says that, this is the 8th of October now, this is number 72. Ms. Rutman says she will check where the minister needs to write to the board to clarify the matter of the 5 years or whatever it is. And I think it's also important to reflect at this stage for the committee that I serve on other boards as well, where there are 5-year terms for senior government officials. And there are others that are permanent. So you know, I don't know that we've got it completely sorted at this stage, which way it goes. But in this particular case, we get told that, you know, there'll be, Ms. Rutman will find out where the minister will write back to us about the tenure now. On the 16th of October, Dr. Ben addresses a letter to Minister wherein he proposes various income bands based on surveys that we had gone and done with Mercer, with Deloitte, with PE Corporate and others, because we wanted to make sure that the salary bench or the salary band was correct. I think this is where I'd like the committee maybe just to stay with me, because I think this is at the nub of what happened with the Molefe matter. The issue with the Molefe matter goes horribly wrong in that the board had written and had expected, as per every other CEO, this would be a permanent appointment. Then the whole issue about pensions and whether he qualifies or not is not in contention at all, because that's how Eskom always did it. So we're waiting for this letter from Minister. I get no feedback on any letter that comes from Minister to confirm that it's a 5-year period. On the 9th of November, Dr. Ben hands Brain Molefe a contract. It's called a fixed-term contract, which Brain signs. And in that, it talks about his pension benefits, his medical aid benefits, etc., etc. It's important to note the date. That's on the 9th. It talks of a fixed term. There's no term in it, which means a term could be 10 years, 15, 20. There is no term. It's considered, if you ask the people in Eskom, what does it mean? It meant a full-time job, not a 5-year job. I have, in this week, received an email that was sent from the department to Ms. Daniels, dated the 4th of November. Remember, Dr. Bean has already gotten Mr. Molefe to sign this fixed-term contract with no contract, with no term on it, on the 9th. On the 4th of November, the letter that we had been waiting for, confirming the tenure of 5 years, arrives with Ms. Daniels. On the morning of the 9th of November, Ms. Daniels writes to the Executive of Remuneration asking him to do the contract with what Minister has said for 5 years. The difficulty is the letter or the contract that gets given by Dr. Ngubane to Mr. Molefe does not state a term. So I believe that we need to ask Ms. Daniels why she sat on it for 5 days, and she was responsible for Dr. Ngubane's office. Why she got Dr. Ngubane to give Mr. Molefe a contract with no term in it. Because had that been followed through to the letter as was requested by the department, the issue of whether there was a pension or no pension would not have been a discussion point. Advocate, I hope that got all that information for you.
Now, thanks for that information, and if need be, we would not hesitate to call Ms. Daniels back to ask the questions. But I want us to go back to the pension. It does appear in a meeting in February 2016, your committee that you chaired was seized with the matter. So notwithstanding what Ms. Daniels would have dealt, how she would have dealt with the letter from the minister with specific instructions around the contract, that it became apparent and it was accepted to everybody that this was a fixed term of 5-year contract of employment. What then happens in the meeting of the People and Governance in February 2016 around the pension discussions?
Thank you, Advocate. And I think I only pointed that out to just say to you that had we followed sequentially the requests and instructions from the department, there would have been no need to have a discussion on pensions at all. That was my only reason for articulating it like I did. When we now we sat with a scenario where Mr. Molefe had signed a contract, which is now a fixed term contract with no term on it. So according to him, this is full time. Then we get the letter later, which now says, now you've got to sign a different contract, which is now for 5 years. Mr. Molefe then at that stage said to us, guys, you know, I've gone from one state-owned company to another, always on 5 years, on 5 years, on 5 years. My motivation and really being keen on Eskom was because I thought I could retire here. So myself and the chairman, together with the head of the remuneration, executive remuneration, Mr. Anton Minna, sat together and we had a discussion on what does this mean? And I remember saying, so what are we taking away from him? Or what are we asking him to do by a full-term contract, which has got full-term being no term, and trying to persuade him to take the 5-year contract? And one of the things that Anton said to us was, what we are taking away from him is his ability to retire from Eskom. I said, okay, so what does that mean? And then he took us through what had happened previously with all other CEOs who had obviously been there for longer terms, one accepts that after their tenure, they would be given a 5-year bonus in recognition for services rendered over the time. That was the first thing. So there was a 5-year term. We said, okay, so what else is there we can do? He said, well, there is a rule that says if you've been in the organization for 10 years and you are 50 years old, the organization would then pay for certain things, pay for certain waivers of penalties, etc. That had been done before. So we said, okay, looking at that then, After 5 years, Mr. Molefe would be 55. Then that same rule could apply, except he wouldn't be there for 10 years. So we discussed it and we took it to P&G, where Mr. Minnar came and did the presentation to P&G to explain to us that this had been done on numerous occasions for other CEOs. And told us about the rule in 1992 or 1999, where Jan Maria actually said any CEO who leaves gets an additional 5 years in pension. That's just been there all the time. So with that in mind, Mr. Minnar brought the proposal, the resolution, to People and Governance. We explained the process as I've explained it to you now, and People and Governance accepted that after 5 years, Brain Molefe would be 5 years, he would be 55. The only thing that would mean is he hadn't been there for 10 years. And at that stage, we agreed that we could buy that additional 5 years for him. Now, if you read the minutes, it's not that clear, and I'm sure in the minutes. But if I actually went and re-listened to the actual transcript, or I've got a transcript of the actual explanation that Mr. Minnar gave, and it is clear from here that this was going to happen after 5 years. It was also going to be with the maximum of, he'd be 55 at the time with an additional 5 years, not 60, not 50 with 60, with the 13 years that was paid out afterwards.
We now know that that meeting where Mr. Minnar brought the letter was incorrect. So
that's a different meeting, sir. That one, you're talking about the end of it. This is a corporate meeting on the 9th of February. You're referring to back end, when the early retirement kicks in.
My apologies. My apologies. So the People in Governance, then properly constituted, takes this decision, but they are writing to the minister. There's a letter addressed to the minister communicating this proposal. What is the purpose of the letter to the minister? What are you trying to obtain from the minister?
Advocate Venara, let me just go back. Remember the meeting that this happened, where this discussion happens, where the resolution is taken, is the 9th of February 2016. The letter you are referring to is as a result of us knowing or finding out now on the 11th of November 2015, we're in a quandary. We're sitting here now with a man who has signed a document that says it's a fixed term contract with no period. And now we're asking him to go from there and go to sign one that says for 5 years. It's at that stage that Mr. Molefe expresses his discontent, because he was of the impression this is a full-time job. And at that stage, the board realized we had a dilemma which we must try and correct. So all the discussions around, like I explained, 50 years old and 10 years service, that's when that happened. We then wrote to the minister informing her of a proposal around his pension benefits. Now, I must say, from the 25th of November until the 9th of February, we heard nothing. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, I'm sitting in a meeting with a company secretary, skilled company secretary, and another company secretary with her, with 35 years experience, and somebody who's just employed over the last 17 years, how many CEOs, the people know what they're doing inside. And I rely on that it's okay for us to pass a resolution, even though we hadn't heard back from the minister. So we had not heard back from the minister at that stage. I'll talk to you more about what happened at the meeting with the minister when she called us in when she wasn't happy with the pension a bit later.
Yeah, before we get there, you, before sitting in February 2016 to pass this resolution, you had 4 months earlier written to the shareholder representative making a proposal. That must surely have taken into account that the issue of the pension has now become a material condition of employment for Mr. Molefe. Is that correct?
I would agree with that, sir.
And because the minister, as shareholder representative, has got a say on the employment of Mr. Molefe, she would naturally have a say on those terms and conditions. Thus, you're writing to her seeking for her approval. Is that correct?
No. My understanding was never it was her approval. Ms. Daniels had told us that it's not an approval that we're seeking. We are advising Minister of how we're going to resolve the matter. In fact, I was listening to Ms. Daniels' presentation where she said everything that Minister had given us input had been incorporated into the contract. So I would have assumed that, remember, we as the board didn't always get all the information that came between the department. Certain things we did, but not always.
Forget about Ms. Daniels. I'm asking you as a non-executive director with a fiduciary duty to the company. You had written a letter through your chairperson to the shareholder representative with what you call a proposal to the minister. You've on record admitting that the pension issue of Mr. Molefe was a material condition of employment, which surely the minister had a say about it. What is your understanding about that?
Advocate Venara, you're making it very difficult for me to tell me to forget about Ms. Daniels. Unfortunately, as a director, I rely on the people inside who know the system better than I do. And if Ms. Daniels tells me it's for noting and there is no problem with it, she sat in the meeting when the resolution was passed. I had no reason not to believe that was correct. And I don't think I was breaching my fiduciary responsibilities. I asked questions and I relied on answers that I was given.
As a non-executive director with fiduciary duties, you do ask for advice. You are then not absolved from your responsibilities of still applying your mind to the advice. That is what I meant by forgetting Ms. Daniels. Maybe it came across a bit harsh. It was not intended as such. I'm trying to understand why you, with your fiduciary duties, having taken a decision to write a proposal to the minister on what you are saying was a material condition of employment, which the minister had to have a say in it. Why would you accept an advice then that says, no, but this is just for information?
Let me answer it this way. In the minutes, it says we have received no feedback from the department. It actually says that in the minutes. It goes on to then call for Mr. Minnar to come and present the resolution and the thinking around it. My understanding at that stage is, having applied and being fully cognizant of my fiduciary responsibilities, is that that is okay at that stage.
Let us wrap up. The time is against us. The pension payout made to Eskom pension fund is clearly not consistent with the resolution, rightly or wrongly, that you took in the February meeting. Is that correct?
It is correct, sir.
Now, on what possible resolution then could this pension have been made to the Eskom pension fund? Because he clearly does not meet what you had passed on as a resolution. He didn't meet those requirements. How then do we still get monies taken from Eskom, paid over to the pension fund, for those funds to be paid over to Mr. Molefe as his pension?
I think let's start with when the resolution was taken. It was taken on the basis of after a 5-year term, this is what would be considered. Let's start with that. I think that's where you are correct in saying that it shouldn't have happened, because it shouldn't have. When Mr. Molefe applied for early retirement, that letter stating or requesting early retirement never came to P&G. It went to the chairman of the board. I never saw it. I didn't know what the contents of it was. And apparently it didn't go to the minister as well. I think in my notes I said it went to the minister, but I'm told it didn't, but in any case. So when on the 21st of November, that's the meeting that you speak of, which was in Court, we had a meeting to discuss state capture and what the what Eskom's actions were going to be, or what we were going to consider. We had senior counsel. Because it was a special P&G, there were only 2 members of P&G and the rest were other board members, which meant we were not quoted as a P&G. The very first line of the minutes stated that. So when Anton Minnaar came in and read an extract, he didn't bring a submission, he didn't come and say this is what's being considered, he read an extract of a letter that was going to Dr. Ben regarding Brian's request. We noted it in principle, bearing in mind at the first instance, the minute is clear, this is not a decision-making committee. So my understanding, by noting what was being said, not on a submission, but on an extract of a letter, was that this was going to come to a full P&G for consideration, or at least by round robin, after which, depending what P&G says, it will go to a full board for discussion, where things like, but it's not 5 years, the guys he can't qualify. There was apparently in his contract, apparently in his contract there was something about a 6-month exit clause. The board may have said you're in breach. There were a lot of things that the board may have said, but that never happened. After Anton left P&G, where there was no approval, and it's clear from the minutes, he took it to Dr. Ben. Now, I didn't walk with him, so I don't know. This is what I was told, that apparently he took it to Dr. Ben's office, and I'm told that Dr. Ben signed it. I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to ask Dr. Ben and Mr. Minnaar exactly how that works. When that happened, and when I heard, because I then followed up to say, but where is this thing? I was told by Ms. Daniels, and once again you can check with Ms. Daniels, she told me in the presence of another board member, and you can check it with her, we do not need a full board signature on this. The resolution of February stands. That is why, even when asked by the minister in April of this year, when this thing blew up in the media, I was still convinced that we had done things exactly according to the delegation of authority and within the rules and policies of Eskom. And to confirm that, on the meeting of the 24th of April, and I know I'm kind of jumping forward, Ms. Daniels, together with Adil Patel from Cliff Decker, came and went line by line on how this board had followed the exact correct process with the approval of that payment, not the payment, with the application. So, you know, Advocate Venaro, when I sit here today and you tell me that this is wrong for these 15 reasons. I say, where were these people why didn't they tell us it was wrong before? And there were opportunities, even after Mr. Molefe left, for people to have acknowledged that we've made a mistake here. And I'm happy to say that the mistake was mine if I know it was. But in the minutes, I in fact say to Mr. Patel, please explain to me where we've gone wrong. And he said, this was done to the letter of the law.
Just to close this aspect, as you see there, ma'am, on the understanding of the pension, that Eskom paid an X amount of money to the Eskom Pension and Provident Pension Fund, there was no resolution within Eskom, board or its subcommittee, for this money to be paid to Mr. Molefe under the circumstances under which it was paid. Do I understand you correctly?
Okay, let me just make sure that I understand. Are you referring to the resolution of February, or are you referring to the resolution to pay him out early retirement? Early retirement?
No. Remember your resolution. You on record are saying the money that was paid by Eskom to the fund was not consistent with your resolution for the reasons that you've articulated. Is that correct?
Consistent with the resolution of February. That's what I'm checking, yeah.
Now, is there a subsequent resolution that you are aware of in terms of which this money gets to be paid by Eskom to the pension fund?
Advocate, there isn't another resolution.
Now, as you sit there, if there's no resolution authorizing this payment from Eskom to the pension fund, isn't this then theft of monies from Eskom taken through to the pension fund, paid over to Mr. Molefe, camouflaged as a pension?
It's an interesting question. That's certainly not how I saw it until you asked it. But remember, from our perspective, from my perspective, let me not talk for anybody else, we had done everything 100% correct. Where it went wrong was what happened at the back end. And when I queried it, I was told that Dr. Ben had the requisite mandate. He did not need the board approval to sign it off. So when you ask me about theft, I think that's asking for an opinion. I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that, because that certainly was not how I understood it at the time when it happened.